My name is Maria, and I love waste. I have furnished most of my house from dumpsters. I eat regularly from dumpsters and not once got any cholera or salmonella. I wrote a poem last year on poop, an ode to human waste that I shared with most of you in this room. And so naturally my capstone is on waste, on recycling to be precise. And I wanted more specifically to examine two different ways of collecting and managing recyclables, one called single stream and the other called curb sort. What are these two and why the dilemma? Well, single stream is what most of us here will be familiar with. It's what's happening in this picture. The participants put all the materials into one bin, and it gets collected and taken to a materials recovery facility, otherwise known as a MRF, that is equipped with very expensive, very advanced technology designed to sort those materials. Curb sort, on the other hand, involves participants having at least 2, sometimes as many as 5 different containers that they segregate their recyclables into. And at the point of collection, a human takes each container and puts it into a different compartment in a truck that's designed with several different compartments. And it's then taken to a MRF that has some mechanical capacity, but to a far lesser degree than the single stream MRFs. And just glancing through some of these characteristics that I've put up here, comparing the two, you might be able to intuit what the dilemma that I refer to is. That in single stream, we get much bigger volumes, but also much greater contamination and residue, and also at a much higher capital cost in terms of the infrastructure required. And that's both initial and ongoing. And it may or may not pay off. So, what to do? Well, what I did was to work with the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. They're based in DC, and I worked with the executive director who has contacts in several municipalities in the country. They work specifically on promoting local economic development initiatives all over the US. And the executive director connected me with several municipalities that are considering this conversion from curb sort into single stream. I focused on 2 places, Fayetteville, Arkansas, and Center County, Pennsylvania. And I'll share with you just a little bit about my findings there before I conclude. So the executive director at ILSR shared the data with me, as well as connecting me with 1 or 2 people working locally in each of these places. And the data that I used was hundreds of pages of financial projections, waste characterization studies, survey data. And what I found was that in Fayetteville, they had recently contracted a consultant who concluded that the city should move forward with converting to single stream, largely on the basis of a pilot that they had conducted and their projections, which had 2 problems. The pilot that they conducted largely focused on the single stream alternative and failed to consider the alternative of simply making improvements to the existing curb sort program. And their financial projections also assumed that the cost of investing in the infrastructure would be exactly offset by the incremental net revenue increase of based on very ambitious commodity prices and also very ambitious volume increases in the future. And I failed to mention that actually the report that I did for ILSR was shared with a local community leader in Fayetteville, and just last month, as a result of her advocacy work and the advocacy work of other people, the City Council in Fayetteville voted down the proposal to convert to single stream, which was viewed as a huge success on the part of ILSR's partners, which was great. Center County also was considering this conversion to single stream and found, interestingly, that because of their existing high rates of participation, the incremental increase that they would see in volumes as a result of switching to single stream wouldn't justify the cost of the initial investment, and that converting to single stream would actually only be a positive present value economically if they were to employ all these cost-saving measures, including collecting every other week instead of every week. And only then would it actually make sense for them and would be feasible at all. So in my final report, I outlined some of the prerequisites that I think are the conditions for making one or the other of these systems ideal. But ultimately, I don't think that the answer to the dilemma is either single stream or curb sort. I think, in the words of Professor Roland Holst, it depends. But that largely my conclusion is that waste managers need to be more, less prescriptive and more creative about the mix of strategies that they employ in designing collection systems, namely when to outsource certain services, when to insource certain services, when to use state-led initiatives for creative financing. And so that was sort of the key takeaway in terms of my research. And then just one final closing thought as far as my own objectives of the capstone, which is that when defining what development is and where it happens, the closest to introspection in developed countries and high-income countries that we come to is to observe that, yes, malnutrition, barriers to education, inequality exist in developed countries as well. But the kind of practice, development practice that I want to participate in looks more deeply at that and thinks not just about what development goals should we be examining here in the US, but also how collective behaviors and practices at home, which for me is here, serve to perpetuate and reproduce some of the environmental, social, and economic problems that are seen in the developed world as well. And so I leave you with those final thoughts as far as my own choice in choosing this type of matter, in choosing this type of capstone. And hopefully I can contribute to the world of waste management and thinking about how to design systems that reduce our impact on the planet and on people. Thank you.
For questions, comments?
Yes, my fellow waste buddy.
In general, when switching from curb separation to one stream, do you actually get the people that are already recycling to recycle more, or do you get more households that weren't previously recycled, like by?
Yeah, there's very little data on at that level of granularity, being able to see exactly where is that marginal increase in the participation. I think that the qualitative, the anecdotal information that I've come across says that households who otherwise wouldn't participate would participate. So it's not the households that are already participating that are increasing their volume, that are contributing to the volume increase. It's the fact that you're getting new users who otherwise wouldn't have participated. Yeah.
I thought the answer is that because of ease of use, or just making it easier for them, or why does that change?
Yeah, the ease of use question is interesting. That actually came up in, it is partly an ease of use issue. But I do think that there are ways in curb sort that there could be design interventions to create greater ease of use within curb sort specifically. So in Fayetteville, for example, the pilot that was conducted, that was rolled out, involved the single stream pilot participants got a large bin with wheels, whereas before you had to pick up and carry several bins. And so what that revealed was that the participants really loved bins with wheels, which is not incompatible with curb sort systems. You could easily design a bin with multiple compartments that has wheels and a lid, and so the ease of use is a factor for consideration regardless of which system you choose. It's just a matter of optimizing it. I think, yeah.
I'm curious about sort of the recycling landscape broadly across the country. So do you have any data on how many people in the U.S. use sort of single stream versus curbside?
Yeah, it's huge, and so the data isn't about people; it's about the MRFs themselves. So within the last 20 years ago, 17% of all MRFs in the country were single stream MRFs, single stream compatible MRFs, meaning they were receiving single streams. Today, that number is closer to 65%. Wow. And so it's completely exploded, and partly it's because of the technology advancements, partly it's because of the way that municipalities have negotiated their contracts, and individuals choosing making those decisions is not really a big part of it. It has more to do with the various institutions and private sector and players that are involved.
And do you see it sort of increasingly going towards more curbside? Is that the trend that you've seen?
That's an interesting question. I think that it's actually, the trend is more single stream, certainly. But there's also a counteracting reality, which is that many single stream MRFs have been going out of business. They're operating in the red, partly because the commodities market has taken a huge hit in the last couple of years compared to the time 10 or 15 years ago when a lot of these MRFs were being built for single stream capacity. And so I think that single stream MRFs right now are in a bit of an identity crisis in, as far as being able to operate. But I do think that in most of the US there is more of a trend towards single stream despite that reality.
That's what happened in my house like 5 years ago. It was all sorted, and then within the past couple of years it's turned into single stream.
Yeah,
And I'm
for
from
better
a
or for
very
worse.
liberal place, yeah, so anyway, just curious. Thank you so much.
Yeah, El Cerrito, which is just 2 towns over, was a very effective recycling center,
Yeah.
and they chose to go single stream. Do you know anything about the case history of there?
Yeah. I know, I visited there as part of my research, and I know Maria Sanders, who runs the recycling center there. They're incredibly progressive. I don't know very much about the decision to convert to single stream on that part. But I do know that at their actual facility, if you go to the drop-off, it's highly segregated.
Yes.
They've got, 17 different categories of recyclables. But I believe that the decision, I know that they contract with an external contractor to provide the collection services. And that's kind of what I was referring to as far as coming up with a creative mix of how to outsource and insource certain things. And I think that the vendor that they contract with only does single stream pickups. And that's the equipment that they have, because there's a very specific type of vehicle that's associated with single stream.
One other thing too, there was a tax that the city residents voted in to contribute to that recycling center. So there's a bond that I think it's a few dollars per parcel goes towards it. No, about $100 per parcel goes for the recycling.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.